guys, what is up and welcome back to my channel. As you guys can tell from the title of today's video, I wanted to sit down and talk to you guys all about my favorite villains because we're almost to October. September is almost done. I cannot believe how fast this year is going. But obviously we are reading more spooky books. We're looking for more horror books, those kinds of things. And I wanted to sit down and actually talk about villains because I feel like a book with a good villain doesn't necessarily need to be horror related, but can be kind of read in the same season and give sort of the same effect. If you're really scared by a villain, I feel like it automatically makes the book a little bit more creepy. So today I wanted to sit down and talk to you about all my favorite villains. I have maybe like 9 of them that I really wanted to sit down and talk to you guys about. Some of these are more on the morally gray side of things, but I feel like overall a lot of these kind of give me those villainous vibes. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So the first one I have here is a classic, or at least one for me that I really think of when I think villains, and that would be the Man in Black. The Man in Black is the villain from the Dark Tower series. And the reason why, without going too in-depth on him, because I don't want to give away too much of the story, the reason why I really consider him a great villain is because he's one of those villains that kind of leaves you wanting more. There's so little information on him in the beginning of the series. It's just about how Roland followed the Man in Black through the desert, and he's kind of spoken about in the story occasionally. I mean, obviously he's the big bad guy, but he is more of a ruthless villain. He does what he needs to do to get things done. He does what he wants to do to essentially make the world go round. He's trying to do something. See, this is why it's kind of hard to talk about him. He's trying to do something at the very end of the book or throughout the series that can undo humanity, essentially. And I just really liked him because I feel like he is just such a good example of just like a person who's lost, a person who became a villain because what they wanted isn't the best for everybody, but they're going to want it anyway, and they're going to do whatever they can to get it. And I think because he is so I don't want to say shifty, but he's so sporadic throughout the stories, and there are other villains that sort of build him up, and he's a villain that kind of controls all the other villains. He's one of those like mastermind kind of villains. I just really, really liked him. And for me, like thinking of somebody like the Man in Black actually existing is just a little bit terrifying. All right, the next villain I want to talk about today is also one of my #1 heartthrobs, and that would be the Darkling. I love the Darkling. The Darkling is somebody, I think the reason why I love him so much is because he is true to his core a villain. He wants power. He's going to do what he can to get that power, and he doesn't care who he needs to step on or use in the process. If you're wanting somebody who's just no redeemable qualities, uses people, is just a terrible person, I would go for the Darkling. I can't help how I feel about him, but he's definitely a villain, and I think he's at his core just 100% a villain and not redeemable. All right, next villain I want to talk about here, we're going to talk like earlier version of this character because this character does obviously kind of change throughout the series, and I want to talk about Holland. Holland is a different type of villain. Holland is a villain who is a villain because he's being controlled by other people, and he's doing things that he thinks helps the greater good, but while also knowing that what he's doing is terrible. And I love villains like that. I love the internal struggle of villains. I think that in the Shades of Magic trilogy with Holland, it's done really, really well. Like, you get a good sense of the internal struggle that he has between knowing what he needs to do in his mind as a necessity, but also struggling with the good part of him who knows that what he's doing may not necessarily be the best thing to do. And there's a lot of that in this series, and I think that it's done very, very well, and it gives a lot of depth to Holland's character. Now we're going to go a little bit classic here. We're going to talk about Voldemort. Voldemort is a person who I think is just born from pure evil. Like, yes, he has his reasons for being evil, but what he chooses to do is akin to Hitler, honestly, like getting rid of the mudbloods, as they call them, like getting rid of not purebred wizards is obviously a hint at Nazis. And I think for me, that's why I really was kind of scared of him when I was younger, because that's what it reminded me of. That's what it kind of took me back to. And I think JK does it really, really well for him. Like, he stays a true villain to the very, very end. There is no redemption for him. And I think that it's done phenomenally, as well as because of his magical powers and how strong he is, it makes him extra terrifying. Now, the next one I want to talk about is one that I've discovered recently, and that'd be the Raven in Red from The City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. This villain is not a villain that I thought that I'd be afraid of, but she definitely is. I think that the folklore ghosts and villains that you hear about in other stories are pretty terrifying, and the Raven in Red is actually born from a woman whose son goes missing, so she puts on a red cape and she goes out into the you know, a snowstorm, essentially looking for her son that's lost in the snowstorm. So she's singing to him, she's calling his name, trying to call him back. She's wearing red so that when he sees her, she'll know it's her. Obviously, the son doesn't come back, she doesn't come back, and she dies. And now every winter she comes back and sings to children in the town to get them to come to her so that she can kind of absorb their life force. That is absolutely terrifying. And the fact that I read this in a middle grade book, if you guys want to see my review for it, I'll list it in the cards up above. The fact that I saw this in a middle grade book is terrifying. It is done so well as well. I think that it is just phenomenal. I think that she added such a depth to the story, which I think speaks a lot about her herself. Now, I don't know if this is a real like folktale that is told. I don't know if Victoria came up with this, but either way, I think it was done so well in City of Ghosts. Now, the next one I want to talk about is one that doesn't really, there are books about the series, and that would be Vader from any of the Star Wars world. Now, Vader is one of my very favorite villains because he is a villain born from his circumstances. With everything that happens to him, he's one of those characters that starts out good and pure, and things later on start happening to him that push him over the edge. And I love characters like that because it does leave a lot of room later for I don't want to say redemption, but for them realizing perhaps that they did the wrong thing and rethinking their lives and such, which obviously does happen with Vader. Now, Vader's a pretty ruthless character. If you guys have seen any of the movies or read any of the books, he will kill you. Like, he force chokes anyone who speaks out of turn or talks negatively to him or about him. But it's just done so well, and I think that he is, because his arc is so long and there's so much information about him, I think that there's just so much depth to Vader as a villain, and he will forever stand out as one of my very favorites. Now, the next one I want to talk about is from A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe, and that would be Mother. Mother is a lot of people in this world that they live in have these uncanny abilities where they're able to do things that's kind of magical, but also sort of mechanical at the same time. Mother is essentially part of a secret organization, and she does not age, but what she's able to do is she's able to actually create kind of skips in time. So she's able to kind of stop time, travel, and then be at a new time. It's kind of weird. It's essentially like a black hole. She's able to create kind of mini black holes to travel through. She's able to travel through them very fast, but she's also able to kind of stop time around her, and it is so scary. There is a scene in the book where she stops time, kills somebody, and then starts time. So there's a character who's watching this happen, and she just is essentially standing there talking to somebody, and the next minute they're in pieces all over the floor. And honestly, she's fucking horrifying. Like, I was talking to, I don't think, have I talked to Alex about this, that how terrifying she is? I think I'm gonna message them and let them know, but honestly, like, Mother is so horrifying. The very first time that you're introduced to her is in the first chapter of the book, and you're just like mind blown, like, what happened? She's so complex, and her ability is so cool, and she's kind of like mythical, you know, kind of supernatural, but also kind of like magic, but also kind of like machine. It's crazy, but the depth in that book and the depth that Mother as a villain brings to that book is awesome. And the last villain that I want to talk about is actually a villain from one of my very favorite books, Needful Things, and it's Leland Gaunt. Leland Gaunt is a gentleman in the book who opens a store, and essentially what Needful Things is when you go in there, Leland is able, and for some reason always has, the one thing that a person is looking for, that one thing that they think they really want or really need, and all he asks in return is for you to do something for him. And at the beginning of the book, it's usually just like a small prank that he asks you to play on somebody, you know, cause a fight between two people and whatnot. But eventually it completely overtakes the town, and people in the town start to become violent and crazy, and it's so awesome, because Leland, when you first start reading the book, you don't think that he has a reason for doing it. You think he's just doing it to do it. And those villains are my favorite. The ones that are pure villains who just want to see their effect that they can have on people. And I really liked that about him, honestly. I thought that he was a really dark character, but also a really interesting character, like very intriguing, like why he does what he does. And if you haven't read Needful Things, you absolutely should. It's an amazing book, especially if you're a Slytherin. If you're a Slytherin, you're gonna love that book. But I don't know, I really liked him when I was reading it. I thought that he was, like I said, incredibly interesting. Alright guys, so that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about all my favorite villains. Now obviously a lot of these do come from books, but obviously there are movies that these villains have been in as well. But I just wanted to sit down and talk to you guys all about my favorite villains because I feel like I said, villains add a lot to the season that don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily just need to be spooky or horror related. It could just be finding a really good villain to get you through the fall season. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!